Welcome again to our Biodesign course, Strategies for Innovation and Design on Bioengineering. Today we're going to take a look at the Reimbursement Basics module. So the objectives for today's class is to obtain a high-level understanding of the reimbursement process and all these systems surrounding medical device reimbursement in the US. Also, I want you to learn how to identify appropriate codes supporting reimbursement and of existing medical devices relevant to your need. As you're going to see, reimbursement in the US at least is something that is absolutely determined by codes. And so to know the different types of codes and its classification and how to find them should be of great usefulness for you in your biodesign process. I want you to understand the status of reimbursement for existing medical devices that address the medical need under consideration. And finally, to evaluate the difference between US-based payers, public and private, as well as international payers, public and private. Something really interesting to notice, though, is that in all this reimbursement context, this is quite common of a problem in the US. Not so much in other parts of the world, such as Europe or Latin America, but it's something really important to consider as the biodesign process might get you to a point in which you want to distribute your product to a US-based market, which is, of course, for many devices, one of the largest markets which they can tackle. What are most of the challenge of reimbursement related to? Well, one of the first things that you have to notice is that after getting FDA approval, your journey has just begun. If FDA is sometimes perceived as a maze in which there are a lot of puzzling things and hurdles to outcome, to get reimbursement and to know exactly your reimbursement strategy, and if you apply to a certain code and if your price point is tailored to a certain reimbursement code, might be a bigger maze even. This is something really important to consider in early stages of innovation, since your products are hopefully going to be reimbursed eventually, and if you want to do so, it might be really beneficial for you to know that to enter into existing CPT codes are going to accelerate all your reimbursement strategy, and of course are going to align incentives of the different stakeholders in the system. And when we think about coding on the US system, we're going to have two main sets of codes. There are going to be the ones dedicated for diagnosis and the ones dedicated for procedures. This is going to be something really important for you to understand because it is not a single code for all the process that a patient is undertaking, but there are some that are going to be special for the diagnosis and others that are going to be special for the procedure. In the diagnosis code sets, there are ICD-9 CM sets and there are ICD-10 CM codes, which basically put together all the coding necessary for you to be reimbursed for a diagnosis product. Secondly, the procedure code sets are basically defined by 5 different types of codes. The CPT codes, the HCPCS codes, the ICD-9 Volume 3 codes, the CDT codes, which are entailed for dental purposes, and the APC codes, or ambulatory payment codes. If we take a look a little bit more closely to some of these specific codes, you're going to see that, for example, CPT codes try to accurately describe medical, surgical, and diagnostic services and are designed to communicate uniform information about the medical services and procedures that you get and that are provided by physicians and that everybody can understand. In this sense, coders, patients, accreditation organizations, public and private payers for financial and analytical purposes. CPT codes are important in this sense for treatment because they are going to define exactly and are going to give data to the system of how well a certain product is reimbursed and how effective are those treatment options for a specific purpose. Secondly, the HCPCS codes are used primarily to identify products, suppliers, and services not included in the CPT code, such as ambulatory services and durable medical devices, prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies when used outside physician office. In HCPCS code, it's going to be very common, for example, for a knee replacement or some other types of implantables, which might not be covered in a CPT code, which is entailed for more traditional types of treatments within a hospital context. There are, of course, other types of code. Let's take a look at the ACD and APC codes. The ICD codes, that comes from the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, acronym ICD, in short, provides alphanumeric codes to classify diseases. And it's a way to provide a context that is traceable for all the signs, symptoms, and abnormal findings, complaints, social circumstances, and external causes of a disease and/or injuries. Finally, an APC code, or Ambulatory Payment Classification Code, are the ones used by the United States government as a method of paying for facility outpatient services in the context of Medicare. All these reimbursement codes, as we have mentioned, can be sometimes really complex to code. We're going to have later on in this module a small case for you to practice a little bit of these coding things. But what you should know is that you must try to enter into some United States webpage regarding Medicare and Medicaid coding for reimbursement, so that you get used to how these codes are presented and what do they actually try to accomplish. If we move to a sample of flow money analysis that we describe and explore earlier in this course, you can see that there are founders, payers, providers, and patients all interacting economically and for services. And reimbursement, at least in the US, is going to be tied up to all these stakeholders, at least in the case of Medicaid and Medicaid. But it's also going to be something fundamental for other types of private payers and insurance companies. So you should know that a sample flow of money analysis and an analysis of how these economical factors interact within each other require an analysis of reimbursement and how this reimbursement is given to who and when, with the procedure that is specifically important for you in your device. This is the practical case part of our reimbursement basics module. So there is no better way to understand coding and reimbursement codes if not with a practical case. So let's start with something to get you in very hard motion with all these contexts of reimbursement. Our case for today is called atrial fibrillation. And if you think about atrial fibrillation, you can think of it as a condition where the normal pacemaker of the heart is disturbed either by ectopic pacemakers or by another type of condition in which the heart is not beating in the right, proper way. One of the most important and traditional ways to solve this problem is through an pulmonary vein ablation, which is the single procedure that we're going to talk about in this practical case today. So what is the atrial fibrillation ablation procedure looks like? Well, it's done in a catheterization room within the hospital. It requires a lot of devices on it. It requires the interaction of several types of physicians to actually resolve the problem through the insertion of a catheter that has the capacity to destroy either through thermal or non-thermal means some of these ectopic pacemakers in your heart, and also some, or in the case that it's caused by another means, to solve that problem in the way that it's required. If we think about reimbursement in this case, let's take a look at how this procedure goes and what are the different codes that interact within themselves to actually provide this process and provide reimbursement to all this scenario. The first step is to define the procedure. Okay, so what is the procedure that your specific device, or in this case, in the atrial fibrillation case, what is the typical procedure that is going to take place? Okay, so the typical procedure is going to be an outpatient procedure called an ablation that is going to be done in a procedure lab in a hospital. Okay, so by defining this, we have definitely narrowed down the type of different codes that are going to be applicable to this specific device and treatment. With this, by knowing that it's a procedure lab done in a hospital, that is called ablation, we should know by now that there are two types of codes that are going to apply. The ones that are going to apply to the physicians and the ones that are going to apply to the facilities. And the ones that are going to apply to the physicians are two: the ICD-9 CM codes and the CPT codes. The ones that are going to apply for the facility are going to be the ICD-9 CM codes too, but also the APC codes, which we're going to see how these codes interact together to get, at the end of the day, a reimbursement that is equivalent and a little bit more of what the hospitals and the doctors invested on this procedure for the patient. Let's take a look at case 2 in this part. A physician submits a claim to the Medicare or Medicaid insurance part, or even a private insurance, to do a procedure regarding the ablation. And so what is going to happen is that they are going to search for this code, in this case an atrial fibrillation ablation, and it's gonna come in the databases that the ICD-9 CM codes for the diagnosis and procedure are the ones that are described in the slide, either the 427.31 for atrial fibrillation and the procedural code 37.34 for ablation, excision, or destruction of a lesion or tissue of hard endovascular approach. And of course, if your specific device requires another type of procedure that is not included in the definition of the 37.34 definition of ablation and endovascular procedure approaches, you can take a look at other diagnoses and other treatment options that are included in these codes. After that, you're going to find a CPT code, in this case the 93651, which is a cardiac ablation CPT code specifically. And with this information, we can move to the next stage, which is the 4. But let's take a look at the phase 3 for the facility submission of these claims. So now that the physician has submitted all these codes to the insurance payers, also the hospital, if you are within a hospital, in this case the patient is, the hospital is also going to submit a request within the scope of some type of coding. In this case, the ICD-9 CM code are applicable as above, because not only the physician is going to be paid for the diagnosis and procedure of this pathology, but also the hospital, because there are nurses and salines and many other things that the hospital use in your treatment to provide the care that the patient requires. So they submit the same type of coding, and also they submit an APC code, which basically in this case is the 0086 code, which includes an ablate heart dysrhythmic focus, which is a code that will include the procedure done in this sense for the cardiac ablation. Finally, with that information from the physician and from the facility, the insurance are going to process all these claims of reimbursement to create a sound economical retribution to the hospital and to the physicians for the care that has been undertaken. In this case, Medicare reimbursement levels for this specific case are going to be calculated in $1,000 more or less for a physician. That includes a 20% patient copayment. In the case of the hospital, it's going to come that a hospital is going to receive about $3,000 for the patient copayment minimum of $580 and an average of $800. With this, you are going to have a pretty quantitative economic validation of what is this device and all this treatment reimbursed for. This is very important because the private insurance are going to try to level out the type of treatments that you receive with the copayment that are going to receive. In this case, hospitals and physicians, of course, they are all going to want to align incentives to use just and only just the devices that can enter into these codes within this economical scope and does not cost any further economical burden to these institutions. In this sense, if you have $3,000 to get a cardiac ablation in a patient, and this includes all the inpatient, outpatient, the clinician, and all the fees required to take care of this patient in such a way, then it should be that if you want to create a new device in that same space that can enter into this reimbursement coding system, then you have to think about either substituting another device so that the change in cost is not significantly higher, or if it cannot substitute anything else, but it indeed has more characteristics that are going to enhance all the treatment of the patient, what you're going to want is to provide a price point such low that it is really not that burdensome for a patient to consider to use your new product, which was non-existent before that, to use your new product in that same economical platform that the reimbursement codes gives to you. And with this, you have to know that to get into a reimbursement code should be really important for you in a fast biodesign process, but that you should know that some medical devices and some medical device companies actually try to get new codes issued. And this is a possibility which might take a couple of years to work. But what you have to think about this is that if you want a new code to be issued specifically for your product within a certain procedure, what it's going to happen is that it's going to take a lot of clinical data to show that it's actually way better to use your option than only the standard of care that it's been used, and that it's economically relevant to reimburse for your product because the system in a public health context needs your device to be used to get healthier patients and less revisions for a certain procedure. With this in mind, it's always easier to think about entering to a certain reimbursement code, but trying to come up with a pricing target for your device that enters and fits exactly within the scope of different types of prices that you can that this system can manage. Because what the least thing that you want to do is to claim that you're going to cost more the system for the same type of treatment that you're going to receive. And with this, if you accomplish that, to provide a product that does not significantly change the economical context of a certain reimbursement code, but you indeed provide way better outcomes, then you're going to have a very strong value proposition economically, socially, and clinically to get your product into the market. And with this, we have concluded our practical case. Please refer yourself to the chapter 4.3 on reimbursement basics on our biodesign book from Senius for more information about coding, about reimbursement, and about all the context of economical retribution that you're going to see in the United States for your devices. My name is Luis Soengsen, and thank you for watching.